This episode was originally released as a bonus episode of Real English Radio and is now being released to the public. Enjoy. What's going on, my friend? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Real English Radio. I am your host, Tony Kaizen, and I am back with some crazy ass Reddit stories, my friend. And today, the stories will be all about crazy ass neighbors. You know them. Actually, you might not. It's really common to not know your neighbors these days, at least in the United States. I remember when I was a kid, and I mean like a little kid, I'm talking like 8 years old. That was probably the last time I lived in a neighborhood and I actually knew and liked my neighbors. And there were other kids in the neighborhood that my sister and I would play with. My best friend lives right around the corner, all in the same neighborhood. And my parents were friends with the neighbors across the street and on both sides of the house, some people up the street. And you just knew your neighbors. You had a good time. Sometimes their kids would come to our house, or sometimes we would go to their houses. And it just felt like a familiar community environment. Whereas today, you're lucky if you know your neighbors' names, you know? If anything, you do whatever you can to avoid your neighbors, right? You don't want to know their names. You don't want to see them, make that awkward small talk or none of that shit. Just fucking stay in your space and I'll stay in mine, all right? Keep it down a little bit. Don't be blasting that bullshit ass music Sunday night, 11:30 in the evening. Come on, dude. Anyway, that has absolutely nothing to do with the topic of today's story, right? Crazy ass Reddit stories. All of these are related to crazy ass neighbors, to be more specific. Now, I've got one, two, three. I've got four lined up for you. And as always, I'll be here to explain the nouns, verbs, and adjectives. And hopefully, with these stories, keep you entertained along the way. All right, my friend. So let's get right into it. Story number one. Here we go. My neighbor is very weird. He never waves and has a permanent sneer on his face. And a sneer, S-N-E-E-R, this word describes like similar to the word scowl, C-O-W-L, scowl. And basically it just describes that ugly look on somebody's face when they're trying to visually illustrate or visually show you that they're upset about something. So you just imagine like you're riding through your neighborhood or riding down the street and you see this guy on the side of the road who's looking at you like, why the fuck are you in my neighborhood? Or why the fuck are you driving that car? Something. He's just mad about something. And you can see it on his face. Just got that, I'm not happy today. That type of fucking look. So this person's neighbor is very weird. He never waves and has a permanent sneer or mean, unfriendly, unwelcoming look on his face. When we moved in, we were warned he's a registered sex offender and to call the cops if we see him with kids. One day, he calls up out of the blue, meaning he calls this person's house out of nowhere, unexpectedly. Now, I've never spoken to him before, but he proceeds to launch into his explanation of the sex offender record. Basically, he claims that he hurt some kid in a locker room while they both happened to be naked. He says it was plain old vanilla assault where both parties happened to be nude. Then he hung up. Okay, so just to make sure it's clear, his neighbor out of nowhere calls him. Remember, this neighbor is a registered sex offender, and he calls this person telling the story out of nowhere just to explain his record as a sex offender. Like, no, it's not what you think. What really happened was I was at the gym or the YMCA or some recreational center where they have showers and saunas and shit like that. So it's normal that in the locker room, you might find yourself naked around other men who are also naked, getting out of the shower and about to put on their clothes. So he says it was one of those situations. And apparently they got into some kind of physical altercation and they just happened to be naked coincidentally. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like some sexual shit. And that's what he means when he says it was plain old vanilla assault. Something that's vanilla, this word can be used to describe something that's very basic or very plain, nothing special or extraordinary about it. Like another time you'll often hear this is like vanilla sex. If sex is vanilla, what somebody typically means when they say that is there's nothing super freaky or extreme about it. It's just very straightforward, plain, like missionary, just the least freaky or risque sex you can think of. It's just the basic stuff. No fetishes or freaky stuff that you'll see in pornos and shit like that. You know, no Karma Sutra positions popping off. It's just regular shit. That's something that you'll hear from time to time, just regular vanilla sex. So in this case, when he says vanilla assault, he just means it was normal assault. It wasn't a sexual assault. But since they were both naked and he was a man and this other person involved apparently was a kid or a teenager, they assumed it was some sexual shit, according to him. And after he explained that, he hung up the phone. Okay. All right, let's continue. So this person says, that's not the weird part. It's just to give you an idea of what he's actually like. One day, he starts building a sign in front of his house. Not like a little poster. It's professionally printed on metal and mounted on 2 huge posts set with concrete. This sign is a picture of a puppy and a long, rambling story about how he let his puppy play in the street and it got hit by a car 10 years ago. But it's written in a way where he seems to accuse the neighborhood of murdering his dog. Next to this sign, covering his entire fence, is an enormous banner reading, "We miss you." In parentheses, he says, I don't know who "we" is because he lives alone. And an even larger picture of the puppy, which isn't necessary because directly in front of the banner, sitting on a folding card table, is the actual puppy. What? Oh, okay. Okay, we need to keep reading for that to make sense. Okay, let me read that again. So next to the sign covering his entire fence is an enormous banner reading, "We miss you," and an even larger picture of the puppy, which isn't necessary because directly in front of the banner, sitting on a folding card table, is the actual puppy. He had it stuffed and set it out on display and left it there for days and hid behind the fence waiting for someone to mess with it, but nobody did. The puppy and the banner disappeared, but the metal sign was permanent. It stayed up for years until a bad storm ripped it down. I always wondered what he does with the dog. Does it stay in a closet or does he keep it out in his house? I got my answer. I have a friend who does construction, and one day he was hired by this weirdo neighbor to build a shed. Without my even asking, he tells me the guy keeps a stuffed dog in the living room like a piece of furniture and he talks to it. Okay, I mean, I guess that's a story. And if it's true, that is a little, that sounds like a movie, doesn't it? Like that classic old fucking lonely, weird, probably addicted to drugs at some point or just got a couple of screws loose, has had some kind of trouble with the law. And now he's just like fucking, you know, in his 70s or his 80s going senile and just doesn't know what to do with himself. So he just constantly causing trouble for the entire neighborhood, particularly his immediate neighbors, you know. So just in case that wasn't clear, this fucking weirdo, who according to the storyteller is a registered sex offender, calls this person to explain his sex offender charges without anybody asking him to do that. And then I guess a couple weeks or months later, this guy builds a sign basically saying, "Rest in peace, puppy," that was murdered by somebody in the neighborhood. And then he got that dead dog. He took it to a taxidermist and had it stuffed to make it look like the dog was still alive. I'm sure you've seen those, at least in movies, where it's like a dog or a cat or a deer or something of that nature, and the animal was killed somehow. And then they take they take the corpse and stuff it full of materials in such a way that it will now stand like a statue and you can put it somewhere in your house. And I don't know why people do that, but I've always found it really strange. I'll be honest with you, like to take a dead animal, even if it was your pet, like your pet died, and you stuff it full of God knows what fucking cotton and shit, stuff, you know, like pump it full of chemicals and have it stand upright like this statue in your house. That's fucking weird, bro. Imagine if you did that with like your baby. Maybe your baby died prematurely or in the same accident, playing in the street and gets hit by a car, and then somebody takes that dead baby to a taxidermist and has it stuffed. And then like they put it back in the baby's room in the crib. And now nobody can go in that room. Nobody can touch anything in that room, you know? And there's just this fucking dead baby in there, dude. But it's not, you know, mortifying if they just left a dead baby in there. Because eventually the body would decompose, it would start to stink, it would just be horrific. But since they took it to a taxidermist, removed all the organs and the veins and the blood and the guts, pumped it full of chemicals so it smells like fucking cleaning solution. It smells like somebody just cleaned the kitchen. Like fucking Pine Sol in here. Stuff it full of cotton or whatever the fuck else. Put some clothes on it, a little bit of makeup, and they put it back in the room. Dude, if you saw that in somebody's house, what would you do? What would you do? And so this is where little Alicia, she was taken from us at 6 years old in a tragic car accident. She was playing in the street and somebody hit her with the car. And we just couldn't let go of little Alicia. So we took her to a taxidermist, had her stuffed, and now we keep her in this room. Fucking A, man. Fucking A. Why is that okay with animals and not humans, you know? I've probably talked about this before on the podcast. I just find it fucking weird, our relationship with animals and how it's totally fine for, like, we're against animal cruelty, but the definition of animal cruelty has always been a bit strange for me because obviously having pets is not necessarily cruel, and I'm not against it. I just think it's weird. I just think it's weird to say this pet's owner. It's okay to own animals, but not own other humans. Why is that? You know? Why is that? I'm just asking the question. What the fuck, bro? How is that okay? Especially when we're talking like taking wild animals from their habitat, fucking lions and bears and giraffes and shit, and keeping them in zoos, claiming that we're saving their lives. Get the fuck? Come on, dude. Anyway, we're not going to get off topic here. You know I have a tendency to do that. So that was story number 1, my friends. It wasn't the most complex in terms of language, so hopefully it wasn't too challenging to understand. But obviously, if you got questions, you can hit me up on Discord. But we're going to move right on to story number 2, okay? This one's a bit longer, so here we go. My last neighbor basically stalked me for over a year. Now, let me just get the dictionary definition of stalk, just in case you don't know exactly what that means. To stalk someone means to... No, that's the noun. I need the verb, sir. To pursue or approach stealthily. To harass or persecute someone with unwanted and obsessive attention. Dictionary definitions are never as... Why are they never in plain English, dog? Basically... To stalk someone, it means to follow them or pursue them, often without them knowing, but to an obsessive degree, you know? Like maybe you had this crazy fucking ex-girlfriend and you broke up with her just because she was way too crazy. You couldn't put up with her shit anymore. And when you break up with her, she just doesn't want to accept it. She's like, no, you are mine. You think you're going somewhere else? You thought you could break up with me? You thought you could break up with me? And then she fucking keys your car and shit. She takes her keys and scratches them all over your fucking car. Say, you will never leave me. Susan did this shit. Right? That type of fucking crazy. She's showing up at your job unexpected. You know, she's following you through the grocery store, hiding behind the fucking peanuts and shit. Yeah, that type of fucking crazy. That's what I'm talking about. That's stalking, right? You're following somebody and pursuing them, but you're doing it like in the shadows. And you don't want them to know about it. And even if they do know about it, you probably won't stop. You just keep following them like you're mine. They follow you like you're their property. You're one of their possessions. And they'll be goddamned if somebody else puts their hands on their possession. Is that clear? Is that clear enough? That's stalking, you know? So apparently this person says, my neighbor basically stalked me for over a year. Here we go. Dude moved into the house next door with his elderly parents. When he says dude, he's referring to the guy he's talking about. A lot of times you'll hear that, especially with younger people. Dude did this or said that. Bro said this. Dude said that. Homie said this. They just mean the guy that we're talking about. So dude moved into the house next door with his elderly parents or his old parents. Right off the bat, shit went wrong. Right off the bat just means immediately from the very beginning, from Jump Street, off top, right off the bat. There's 3 different ways of saying the same thing. So right off the bat, shit went wrong. Things went poorly. Things went bad. The first night he moved in, it's the middle of the night, like 1 a.m., and someone starts knocking on my door. Not strong knocks like it's an emergency, but these light taps. I, of course, did not fucking open the door. The next morning at around 10, there are more knocks. The same light taps. And this time I do answer, and it's my new neighbor. He introduces himself, and I ask him if he was knocking the night before, and he admits it, meaning he said, yes, it was me. I politely ask him not to come to my house so late again, and he agrees. Cue the next year of my life. And when he says cue the next year, he's basically saying, let's move on to the next year. Here's a snapshot view into the next year of my life. The dude continues to show up randomly in my yard. Pretty much every single time I went outside, the dude would leave his house and come over to mine. It was like he would wait on his porch, watching my house just to see when I'd leave it. I'd go out to check the mail, and he'd come over. I'd go out to get ready to go somewhere, and he'd come over. I'd go out and would be working in my garden, happen to look up, and he's standing there. Sometimes he just walked over, stood in the middle of the road, and stared at my house, or me not saying a word. Most of the time, he just hung around silently and made the barest attempts at conversation, mostly asking if I had a boyfriend. I lied and said I did, making me incredibly uncomfortable. I told him multiple times to basically leave me alone, starting by being polite and eventually just telling him to fuck off outright. He'd act like he listened and understood, but he kept doing the same shit. It got to the point where I didn't even want to leave my house or answer my door. In parentheses, he still kept knocking, occasionally, and it sounds utterly stupid, but even inside my house, I'd sometimes just get this feeling that someone was standing around just outside, even though I had no knowledge whether that was true or not. Jesus. All right, let me stop and just make sure that's clear, because it was a mouthful of words. So basically, every time this person would leave their house, I'm assuming it's a young woman, but I don't know. Every time, let's just call her she, every time she would leave the house, this guy would find a reason to come over to her house and either make some bullshit small talk or sometimes just stare at her and not say anything, like a fucking creep, bro. And so she started by trying to be polite, basically finding indirect ways of saying, can you please leave me alone? I don't really know you like that. I don't want to know you. So can you just not come over here and not knock on my door for no fucking reason? And that wasn't working. So eventually she got more and more mean with her remarks until the point she was just basically saying, listen, fuck off, bro. Like, leave me the fuck alone. And he would always act like, okay, I understand. I'm sorry. But then he would just keep doing the same shit. And it got to the point where she didn't want to leave her house. She didn't want to go anywhere. And there were even times when she was in her house and just got this weird feeling that somebody was just watching her or somebody was standing right outside her house, even if she didn't know if that was true or not. It's just how she felt. So let's move on. This person says, then he started showing up at other places I was at, meaning not just her house. It's a small town, so I thought at first, okay, maybe it's a coincidence. You're being paranoid. But it became very clear soon enough that this guy was following me. I'd be at the grocery store and he'd come around the corner. I'd be at the gas station and very soon he'd pull up next to me, not even getting gas, but just parking there and watching me while I filled my car. It happened too many times and his behavior was too odd for it just to be happenstance. And happenstance in this case is like coincidence. Now, throughout all of this happening, I was telling people about it. I told our mutual landlord the first time this dude knocked on my door in the middle of the night and that I liked my privacy and didn't like that kind of crap. I told him again after the guy kept showing up in my yard. My landlord basically promised to talk to the dude and tell him to leave me alone after that. Then after I complained to my landlord that the dude was stalking me outside of the neighborhood too, he told me that he'd talk to the neighbor again and that if anything else happened, then he'd kick the guy out. I also have a close friend whose husband is a cop and talked with him about everything, and he basically told me there wasn't shit that could be done unless the guy outright threatened me or otherwise damaged my house or property. He told me the best thing to do would be to move out or to keep talking to the landlord and hope that he'd kick the guy out. Jesus, man. So apparently, this word again, I'm just assuming it's a woman. She's telling the landlord multiple times that she's being harassed by this person. She talked to her friend's husband, who's a police officer, who then explained, well, he's not breaking the law. He just happens to be, quote unquote, happens to be in the same places that you find yourself, and that's not illegal. So there's really nothing we can do legally unless he threatens you, puts his hands on you, or something of that nature. So the best thing you can do for yourself is either move or keep talking to the landlord and hoping that this guy, he kicks him out. He tells the other guy to move, basically, right? So she goes on to say, as it turns out, the landlord eventually did kick the guy out, but not for anything that he was doing to me. The dude apparently couldn't pay his bills and was he was several months behind in rent, meaning he had not paid his rent in several months. That's what it means to be behind on rent. It's a very common thing you'll hear whenever talking about not being able to pay your bills. You say, I'm 2 months behind on rent, I'm 6 months behind on this or behind on that. It means that you haven't paid that bill in X amount of days, weeks, or months. So apparently, it wasn't because of his harassment. The landlord kicked him out because he couldn't pay his bills and was several months behind in rent. The whole family got ousted. What family? They didn't mention a family before. Apparently, this dude has a family. Because she says the whole family got ousted, meaning that news about this whole family was shared with the whole neighborhood or the whole community. That's what it means to be ousted. You have this secret or this controversial thing that happened that you prefer to keep private. And if somebody shares it with the public, then you have been ousted. You know, it's not the most common thing to hear. It sounds not necessarily formal, but I guess you just won't hear it every day. But it is, a normal thing to hear. That's probably contradictory, isn't it? You won't hear it every day, but it's not weird, is what I'm saying. All right. So the whole family got ousted. They left, and according to my landlord, they apparently totally destroyed the house in the time they were living there. Holes in the walls, the floors, literally hundreds of empty liquor bottles in the basement, needles on the ground in the yard, burnt foil all over the place. They also left their pet dog behind when they moved out, locked in the house and half starved and would probably be dead had the landlord not found him. All right. The landlord ended up taking him to court over damages and unpaid rent, and I have no idea where they moved, but I haven't seen the guy since. I now have a new neighbor who I barely ever see, and wouldn't know if I didn't see his car. Oh, I'm reading this completely wrong. Okay, let me start that again. The landlord ended up taking him to court over damages and unpaid rent, and I have no idea where they moved, but I haven't seen the guy since. I now have a new neighbor who I barely see. I read it wrong again. Jesus fucking Christ. I now have a new neighbor who I barely ever see and wouldn't know I had if I didn't see his car come in. What the fuck, bro? Why can't I read this sentence? Jesus fuck. Okay, 17th time is the charm. Here we go. I now have a new neighbor who I barely ever see and wouldn't know I had if I didn't see his car come in and out or occasionally see his dog hanging out on his porch. And I can't tell you how much I prefer it that way. So all's well that ends well. In the end, this fucking creep gets evicted or kicked out by his landlord for not paying his rent and for completely destroying the fucking property. Not because he was stalking this young woman or harassing her in any way, which is really, I think sometimes when you listen to shit online, it's very easy for stuff like that to get blown out of proportion. Like you hear lots of stories about creepy dudes harassing women on the train or in back alleys or at work and shit like that. And I'm sure there's tons of fucking animals out there just, doing shit like that. But at the same time, as a normal person, how do you know whether or not the person who claims to be the victim is actually telling the truth? Right? And I'm not talking about the woman telling this, the assumed woman who's telling this story. And I'm not talking about any real story that I've heard. I just mean in general, if somebody came to you and said, this guy is stalking me, how are you supposed to verify that? Like if you're the police, I guess that's your job to investigate. But like if it's your friend, your cousin, or your daughter, You know what I mean? It's like fucking, especially imagine like you send your daughter to college in another state, which is quite common, especially for families that make decent money. They might send their kid to a different school in a different state because they got an academic scholarship or an athletic scholarship, or the education is better over there, or the school is more prestigious, or whatever. It's just not an uncommon thing for kids to study in a different state. So imagine you send your daughter across the country to go to school, and then she tells you she's being sexually harassed. You know, like you got to fly across country to do what? Like go ahead, Superman. What the fuck are you gonna do? You know what I'm saying? You got to work and pay bills and take care of shit at your house. Like, what do I don't know. I just don't know what the proper course of action would be. You know, like imagine you're this lady in the story. Like you imagine you're her boyfriend. What are you gonna do? Stalk the stalker until you like find him stalking you? I don't fucking know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't fucking know. Um, yeah, I don't know what I would do about that one. Like, and that's the thing is, I'm not saying that men don't get stalked. I'm sure they do, especially the rich and famous ones. I'm sure there's some crazy fucking lady out there stalking their every move, you know? Um, Trying to meet him at the right place in the right time, invite him back to our hotel room and just fucking get him to fuck with no condom so she can get pregnant, have his baby, never work again. You know what I'm saying? That's gotta happen, right? That shit's gotta be out there. Come on, dude. Come on. But young women, just regular women getting stalked and fucking harassed and shit. What are you gonna do? Ladies, if you're listening, Eloisa, if you're listening to this, Alejandra, somebody, let me know. Um, Two questions. What are you gonna do if you're this lady in this situation? How would you handle it? And what would you expect your man to do? If you would expect him to do anything, I'm just curious. What would be the expected course of action? You know? Also, your thoughts on weapons. Like, are you okay with people carrying weapons for specifically for situations like this, or at least like some fucking pepper spray or something? You know, I understand if you don't like guns or knives or whatever, but I mean, at what point do you draw the line? How would you defend yourself if the situation called for it? These are just questions. Just questions. Anyway, while you think about that, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next story. Number 3. This one's much shorter, so we should be able to get through it pretty quickly. Here we go. As kids, we had a neighbor that we called Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul seemed like an energetic. I cannot read today. I don't know. I'm looking at the words in front of me, and I read one word, but another word comes out of my fucking mouth. All right, let's try that again. As kids, we had a neighbor that we called Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul seemed like a generic older man. He was Southern, had a garden, and actually helped build most of the houses in our neighborhood. The first week that we moved in, he brought over fresh cucumbers and tomatoes from his garden. So sweet. Mr. Paul was also eccentric. In the summer, he would sit in a lawn chair on his front porch to sun himself. That came out weird. In the summer, he would sit on a lawn chair on his front porch to sun himself. Now, I've never heard somebody say that, but what I understand when they say to sun himself, they're referring to sunbathing, where you just sit out in a chair or in your front yard or at the beach and just let the sun basically cook you. You know what I mean? So you can get a nice tan. You know what I mean? That's what he means. He would sit in a lawn chair on his front porch to sun himself. By the end of the summer, his flabby skin and beer gut would be a leathery golden brown. Now, flabby, Flabby, flabby just refers to that part of the body that is just pure fat. And, like when you flick it or you smack it a little bit, it starts to shake. That's not the sound it makes, but that's all I can do sonically to help you get the idea. Just imagine like around your waist area. Like if you start putting on a few pounds, you put on those tight jeans and a little bit of your stomach starts to overflow. You know what I mean? It's not flat from your chest down to your pelvic area. There's a little bit of a muffin forming, a little bit of fat, a little bit of rolls or whatever. that extra skin and all that fat is like flabby. It's like soft and almost like gelatin or something. Just blah, 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 blah. You know, if you smack it, it jiggles a little bit. That's what he's referring to, or she. I don't know. That's what this person is referring to. By the end of the summer, his flabby skin and his beer gut, and your gut is like your stomach. So a beer belly or a beer gut is just that big round stomach that a lot of dudes get when they drink way too much beer on a regular basis and they're not exercising, they're not eating healthy, just live this sedentary lifestyle, and all that beer just starts to fucking accumulate in the tummy. I don't know exactly what happens, but it's just something that happens when people drink a lot of beer, apparently. So his flabby skin and beer gut would be a leathery golden brown, meaning that his skin looks similar to like leather. He also got in a fist fight with his son, who pummeled him mercilessly until we got involved. A fist fight, just like, you know, you have your hand, right? If you open your hand completely, that's just your hand. But if you close it to the, you know, like imagine you're going to punch somebody in the face. When you have your hand closed in that particular position, now your hand is called your fist. So when it's open, it's just your hand and you can see your palm. And I clap my palms together, or I hit my palms like that and I'm clapping. But if I close my hands like I'm going to punch somebody in the face, now my hands are called fists. So a fist fight is a fight that involves two people with their hands closed, punching each other with their fists. So he got in a fist fight with his son, who pummeled him mercilessly until we got involved. To pummel someone just means to destroy them physically. Imagine a bull running over human beings, like the running of the bulls in Spain. I don't know if they still do that. Do they still do that in Spain? Victor, let me know. Do they still do the running of the bulls? Just imagine people running down the street in a pack of bulls, or a herd of bulls running behind them. And eventually the bulls catch up to those people and just boom, 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 just run all over them. They get pummeled by the bulls. So apparently this guy got pummeled by his own son until the neighbors got involved. Anyway, they go on to say, but Mr. Paul would also shoot squirrels on his property. They ate the bird seed he put out for bird watching. He would shoot them and apparently other animals, and we learned later that he was a pretty good shot, meaning he had good aim. His aim was very accurate. He did not miss most of the time. Now, while he was our neighbor, three of our cats got mysteriously... Oh, no. While he was our neighbor, three of our cats got mysterious gunshot wounds. All three had direct shots to the chest. Two cats miraculously survived. One had the bullet lodged in her sternum, and the other's bullet came to rest in his arm fat. But the third cat, Ava, I found clinging to life next to our house. She was shot in the chest, and it turns out the bullet ripped through her body, destroying everything in its path. At 7 years old, I watched as they put her down, or they euthanized her, or they killed her, basically. You know how sometimes when an animal is too hurt to continue living, but they're not dead yet, a lot of times out of pity or to be merciful, they don't use the word kill, even though that's what you're doing, but they will euthanize. They will chemically kill the animal or put the animal down. Okay. So at 7 years old, I watched as they put her down and held her body as it stiffened on the way home from the vet. They took home a dead cat. What the fuck, bro? Is this something that people just do? It's the second story. We talked about somebody taking home a dead animal. What the fuck, dog? I don't understand that. I don't get that. He died several years later, meaning the neighbor. The neighbor died several years later. I hated him and I definitely don't miss him. All right, Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul didn't play no fucking games. Jesus, man. I never understood that. Like, I understand, I guess if you don't like animals, I guess I could understand for maybe some reason you don't like them. But man, those stories, I remember this girl I dated, she had at least like 4 cats. I want to say it was closer to like 6 or 7. Her and her family just had something with cats, dog, and they just had a bunch of them running around the house. And apparently they had the kind of cats that they would let, or I shouldn't say it that way. They were the kind of people that would let their cats roam in and out of the house whenever they wanted. They would leave windows open and shit so the cats could leave whenever they want and come back whenever they want. And they always left and came back. But apparently one of their neighbors on the street just, I guess, didn't like animals in his shit, like in his backyard or his courtyard or whatever. And so since in her country, like all the houses are basically built one next to the other, one house is connected to the next one. The cats could leave the house, jump up on the wall, and walk along that wall and jump into other people's backyards. And so one of her neighbors apparently, I don't remember how they found this out, but one of their neighbors started leaving poison around his courtyard, knowing that animals would come into his yard, be curious, eat that shit, and then eventually die. I don't know how they found that out, but that's what I was told. And so apparently one of her cats got into this dude's yard, ate some of that poison or whatever, and got sick, and they had to take the cat to the hospital. And I guess they found out that the cat had eaten some kind of poisonous material and then died. And it's just like, man, the type of fucking evil you gotta have in your soul to spend your day doing some shit like that, man. Just murdering animals. And it's weird to use this word, but innocent animals, you know what I mean? It's like, what, that's some evil shit, dude. That's some evil shit. I guess no matter what form of life it is, whether it's a person, a cat, a fucking dog, whatever, that's some evil shit, man. That's fucking. I mean, I get it. You don't want the cats in your yard or whatever, but Jesus Christ, man. That's some evil shit. Okay, well, there you go. There's another crazy ass neighbor for you. I would love to be able to include crazy ass neighbor stories from other countries. I don't know what country these are from. I just know these stories are being written in English. But I gotta believe there's crazy ass neighbors on every continent, in every country. Right? Some people are just out of their fucking minds, and you live next to them and there's no control. You have no control over that. Fucking A. But anyway, let's move on to story number 4. This crazy ass neighbor on Reddit. Here we go. This story is going to be fun. My parents built our house from scratch in the late 80s. And when somebody does something or builds something or creates something from scratch, it means from absolutely nothing, starting with zero, right? So they didn't buy a house and renovate it. They took a piece of land and built a brand new house on top of that land. From scratch, they built the house. Excuse me. Okay, my parents built our house from scratch in the late 80s. Our first experience with this weirdo was Jesus Christ. Our first experience with this weirdo was when the house was being built. Only the frame was up, and my parents came to see the progress only to find him standing in the middle of what would eventually be our living room. So imagine, I don't know if you've ever seen a house being built, but typically they'll lay the foundation, right? And then on top of that, they'll build the frame of the house before they put up the walls and install the wires and the pipes and all that shit. It's just the bones of the house, the skeleton, if you will. So apparently they came to see the progress of the house, and they found this fucking weirdo standing in the middle of their future house where the living room would have been, just standing there. For what reason? I guess we're about to find out. I don't know. So only the frame was up, and my parents came to see the progress only to find him sitting in the middle of what would eventually be our living room. Confused, they made small talk and learned he was our neighbor. Fast forward 5 years. My parents decide to take me to the family for my first birthday, 8 hours away. And what they mean when they say that is go visit the family in some other place to celebrate this person's birthday. And they lived 8 hours away, right? So we had a beautiful, full-size, 25-foot tall oak tree in our front yard that apparently this neighbor had accidentally planted on what would become our property years later. Oh, I see. So they had a big, beautiful oak tree in their front yard that apparently this neighbor had accidentally planted on the wrong part of the property. Okay, so he planted the tree on their property unknowingly. Now, while away, meaning while they were at visiting the family, he decides to fully excavate the tree or remove it from the ground, leave a giant dirt patch and replant it 20 feet away from where it was on his property. What the fuck, right? The tree died a few weeks later. Keep going a few more years. I'm 14-ish, meaning more or less 14, finally learning how to mow the lawn or cut the grass. It was no mystery that said neighbor had a window on the side of his garage, and he liked to watch whatever me and my dad were doing. While mowing the lawn, I see him staring, as if this wasn't obvious. So I would wave, and he does one of those quick ducks like, whoa, that was close. So what they mean with this part of the story is like, imagine your neighbor from his house can see you through his window. And apparently he'd be watching this kid cut the grass. He'd be watching his dad work in the yard. And the kid, noticing this person obviously standing there watching everything he's doing, would wave to be polite, to say hello, wave at his neighbor. And the neighbor would like disappear really quick behind the curtain or out of view to pretend that he wasn't just watching them, staring at them while they were working in the yard. That's what he means. So keep going to where we are now, and he's really gone off the rails, meaning he's really lost his fucking shit. He's lost his mind. You probably heard me say that tons of times on this podcast, right? Like, this episode is falling off the rails. It means losing all control, losing all coherency, just going crazy. That's what it means. So keep going to where we are now, and he's finally gone off the rails. He tried to run over my neighbor's dogs while they were on a walk on our street because he blames them for shitting on his lawn. And in parentheses, it says he has his own dogs that do that. He also made a fake complaint to an electrical company to get the street lighting in the neighborhood behind us turned down. No, I read that wrong. He also made a fake complaint to an electrical company to get the street lighting in the neighborhood behind us to turn down their lights, and is now being charged for $13,000 worth of unnecessary work. This is honestly half of it. If people are interested in more, I'd be happy to keep going, but for now, I'll cap it here, meaning I'll stop the story here. And then they edited this post and added some stuff. So it says, continuation. Throughout my entire life, his wife has always insisted on sunbathing in skimpy bikinis. She has to be at least 65 now, so I'm talking like 45 to 56, which is rather scarring for a young kid. If an experience is scarring, if it leaves a scar, it just means metaphorically, like a mental scar. It was emotionally traumatic for a young 14-year-old kid to have to look at this 56-year-old woman in a skimpy bikini sunbathing in her yard, is what he's saying. I'm assuming this is a guy. I don't know. So this one really pisses my dad off. Our property used to have a stream so small and peaceful, there are pictures of my dad standing on both sides at once. The genius neighbor thought it disrupted his property, so he rerouted the stream through his backyard. It fucked it up pretty bad, and now, years later, our cute stream is now a 20-foot wide swamp because it got so backed up from his, what I think is technically illegal, stream rerouting. About 10 years ago, my dad began noticing that a lot of deer were dying on our property. We attributed it to coyotes because it began to get weird when none of them had any marks or cuts or any signs of a struggle. No, I read that wrong. Not because. I'm fucking up all these stories today, y'all. I'm sorry. About 10 years ago, my dad began noticing that a lot of deer were dying on our property. We attributed it to coyotes, but it began to get weird when none of them had any marks, cuts, or any signs of a struggle. Meaning, we thought they were coyotes attacking the deer, but none of them had any signs of struggle or teeth marks or anything like that. Now, eventually, when cleaning out the thick woods in between our two properties, which is like 20 feet of dense woods, my dad found a pile of deer bones and one badly decomposed deer body. We think he had been poisoning them to stay away from his all sacred gardens. But the one that, in my opinion, takes them all is this. When I was in like 6th or 7th grade, I was scootering around in my driveway, normal kid shit, and I saw a gray animal cage in his driveway with something inside clearly going nuts or going crazy. It seemed like he tried to hide the trap behind some bushes, but the animal, I'm suspecting a raccoon or possum, something of that size, had managed to wiggle the cage out, meaning it was behind these bushes or these trees, but the animal was going so crazy that he would, eventually boom, 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 boom against the side of the cage, and the cage moved from behind the bushes. I hope that makes sense. Move behind and wiggle the cage out. He surprisingly didn't notice me in the driveway and proceeded to pick up the cage and scuttle into his shed, or run quickly into his shed. I staked out the shed for an hour or two in horror, and when he eventually came out, there was no animal to be found. Holy shit. Sounds like a movie or a book or some shit like that. So just in case that's not clear, He's saying the worst of them all was this following story. When he was in 6th grade, he was hanging out in his driveway and he saw this crazy animal in this cage next to his neighbor's house. Eventually, his neighbor grabbed the cage and went in his backyard into this little shed, this small, building where you keep yard tools and a lawnmower and stuff like that. And I'm guessing he heard some screaming and some struggling and shit. And then the neighbor came out, but he never saw the animal again. So this motherfucker's on some, he's an animal serial killer. Do animal serial killers go to jail? I don't know. I mean, I guess so, right? That's animal cruelty. You would think so. But Jesus Christ, man. That's some weird shit, dude. That's one thing, like, no matter who you are or where you're from, there are two things you don't really get to decide or choose in life. One of them is the person you're born as, meaning your personality, the family you were born into, or the country, the language you speak. You have no control over that shit. You're just born into the family you're born into. You don't get to choose your parents or your siblings or your cousins or none of that. You got what you got. And the second thing is neighbors, man. You don't get to choose your neighbors. Unless you are going to live like off the grid in some sustainable way where you got your own farm and you got animals and vegetables and fruits and shit and you're out there maintaining all that. You got solar panels for electricity and Wi-Fi. You drive a Tesla or some shit. Just off the grid. You don't need anybody for anything. You took some healthcare courses, so if somebody breaks an arm, you know how to make a fucking cast. You can do blood transfusions and shit. Or you're close enough to the city that you could drive there within an hour or something. I don't fucking know. That's option one. Or you're just so rich that you can choose to live literally anywhere on the planet. And at least you have a chance that your neighbors are also other rich people that don't want to know their neighbors or be close to their neighbors or be bothered by their neighbors. Or you can just buy a big enough plot of land to where your closest neighbor is so far away that you never hear or see them, Or they're like you live in a penthouse in the city and your other neighbors, again, the penthouse is so big that your neighbor's still like meters and meters away from you, or they're just never home because they're rich and like out doing other shit. I don't fucking know. But you don't get to choose those. Family and neighbors. Two things you just gotta fucking deal with. Even if your neighbor's clearly wrong, they're harassing you and shit, man. I'm sure if I like spent more time on this Reddit post or like searching for videos on YouTube and shit, I could find much crazier stories about just fucking insane people wreaking havoc on their neighborhood, making it worse for everybody that lives on that street. You know what I mean? And there's nothing you can really do about it. Because if you try to retaliate and take action against your neighbor, depending on what you choose to do, you might be breaking the law or harassing them. Then they call the police on you. And even if they started it, you're the one that gets in trouble. Just like when you were in school, when you were a little kid, or maybe you had a brother or a sister, and they would hit you first, and nobody saw that shit. Then you turn around and fucking hit them too, and that's the only thing that people see. And then you go to fucking timeout, or you get slapped in the fucking face. You get your ice cream taken away because your little punk ass brother started some shit, but nobody saw that. Nobody fucking saw that, right? So you can't hit back, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? I think I would, if I had like some bitch ass neighbor making my life harder, I would just get a paintball gun and just light his ass up with paintballs every chance I got. The only way he's going to be able to prove that it was me shooting him with paintballs is if he has cameras, And I just make sure I'd pay somebody to take out his cameras 6 to 12 weeks before I actually make my attack, I'll just pay some kid from a local high school $600. Go fuck up them cameras, rip them out, throw them away. Text me when it's done, Matter of fact, don't even text me because then they'll have proof. Just leave a package in my mailbox. Leave a little rubber ducky in my mailbox to let me know it's done. And then I just catch him in his backyard one day and just light his ass up. Ting, 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 ting. Just pop his ass with a bunch of fucking rock hard paintballs. I don't fucking know. I remember when I think I just mentioned it in this episode when I was like 8 or 9 years old. I lived in a really good neighborhood. Like, it wasn't rich by any means, but it was good in the sense that it was safe, it was quiet, lots of friendly families and cool people. We knew our neighbors. My best friend lived there and all this stuff. And I think I was maybe 9 years old. And it wasn't even Halloween. I don't remember what time of year it was, but I just remember looking out of my window because from my bedroom window, I could see the street. And I looked out there one day and some girls had TP'd my house. And maybe you don't know what TP is. TP is often used to refer to toilet paper. A lot of times that's what people mean when they say TP. Not always, but that's what they mean. And it's also a verb. To TP somebody's house means to take a bunch of toilet paper and throw it all over the fucking place, all over the tree and the driveway and your cars and your house. Just throw toilet paper everywhere, which, as you can probably imagine, is a fucking bitch and a half to get off, you know? It's just a pain in the ass. And yeah, some girl, I never even figured out who it was. I just remember my dad, once he saw it, he got in his car, started driving around the neighborhood looking for who did it. And he said he found like 3 girls who said that they wanted to fuck with me. And that's why they TP'd our house. And I never saw the girls. I never figured out who it was because he didn't know them. But apparently the girls knew me. And just like, the fuck, bro? Never figured out who those girls were. I have no idea. To this day, I don't know who did it. But apparently they did it because of me. So maybe I was a little fucking asshole when I was 8 or 9 and they figured, oh, we'll show him. Or maybe they liked me. I don't know. Maybe that was their idea of flirting. Because you know, when you're kids, that's what most kids do to flirt. They're like mean to the girl or the guy that they like, right? Which is fucking hilarious shit. And has absolutely nothing to do with crazy neighbors anymore. I'm just fucking rambling here. But those are the 4 stories, my friend. I'm curious to know what y'all think about this one. Start a thread on Discord or something like that. Let me know if you have any crazy neighbor stories, because again, I think this is something that's universal. No matter where you live, who you are, or whatever, like all of us have probably had crazy neighbors at some point. I'm sure I've been a crazy neighbor at some point. But I guess we'll have to think of and share those stories in a different episode on a different day, my friend. I'm gonna get out of here for now. But before I do, I'd like to thank you as always for your time, your attention, and your support of this podcast. I really appreciate it, my friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I will certainly, that came out weird, didn't it? I was trying to say certainly. Certainly. I will certainly. I will certainly talk to you soon. Take care. Peace.